Okay, in this stage, I want to talk about how we usually deal with risk in a typical construction project. The risk management procedure is a framework for the actions that need to be taken to handle risk in projects. The aim is to eliminate or control different types of risk in workspace, for example, health and safety risks, procurement risk, financial risk, or construction phase risks. The risk management procedure is a set of 5 steps of identifying, assessing, planning, and implementing the plan, and finally communicating. The first 4 steps are sequential, while communication will always be done to let stakeholders know what is going on and to get continual feedback during the process. The first step is to identify our risk in the projects, both threats and opportunities that could affect the project outcomes. And then we should create a risk register that encompasses all risks we identified. And this helps us to manage risk during the course of the project. In the next step, we assess the risk in terms of their probability and impacts on the project objectives. And in the third step, we have planning. We should prepare responses to threats, for example, help reduce or avoid the threat. Or we can plan for maximizing the opportunities, for example, if something positive happened to the project, we can take advantage of it. In the implementation phase, we carry out the planned responses mentioned in step 3, which was planning. And finally, we should keep communicating to stakeholders, make them informed about the situation of each risk and the future uncertainties in the project. The identify step can be divided into 3 more steps. First, we should identify the context, which is to understand the project from risk point of view, whether this is a high or low risk project. We can ask questions, for example, what type of project is this? Or what is the cost to the company if products or when a product doesn't work? Or how complex is this project? And something similar. In this stage, you also need to create a risk management strategy for the project, and this will provide information on the risk management procedure to follow, the structure of the risk register, risk categories, reports and responsibilities, and also scales for likelihood, impact, and proximity of risk that needs to be completed in the risk register. Then we should identify risk. You and your team uncover, recognize, and describe risks that might affect your project or its outcome. Usually we review lessons we learned from the previous projects. We should look for any risk checklists available in the organization, or we can invite specialists into a room and do brainstorming activities to identify risk in a specific project. And then we should put all of these risks in a risk register, which is a tabular structure that provides a home for every element of your risk management process. And we should describe the risk in terms of cause, event, and effect. A project manager cannot identify all risk for a project. He or she needs help from project team members and also other stakeholders. In this slide, you can see a few techniques that can help you to identify risk in your project. For example, we can use our experience from previous projects, as I explained before. Some organization has an in-house checklist that you can use. We can implement brainstorming techniques or Delphi. We can have a Delphi workshop to identify risks. we can do some project document analysis. So we go through all documents available. We can do desk study and review all the documents available to identify problems or risk in the future. Another famous technique is decomposition or risk breakdown structure, or RBS. Probably you know about work breakdown structures, similar stuff for identifying risks. And RBS is a hierarchical structure of potential risk sources. And as you can see in this table, the right-hand side, here is an example of RBS. And in level 0, we can see we have the general project risk. And then in the first level, we have the categories: environmental, industry, client, and project. In level 2, again, we try to break it down into small chunks. For example, on the client, we have client team, PM team, targets. On the project, for example, we have team, tactics. And again, in the third level, we try to further break it down. For example, on the environment, you can see legislation changes or changes in demand or availability of raw materials. And in the project, for example, you can see that we may have problem with cost control, or changes may happen in core team of the project. Step 2 is to assess risks. In this stage, you develop an understanding of the nature of risk and the potential to affect the project goals and objectives. Assessment covers two actions: estimating and evaluating risk. Estimating is about assessing the probability, the impact, and the proximity for each threat or opportunity. And evaluating is to group all the risks together, both threats and opportunities, and get an overall risk value for the whole project. Basically, you evaluate or rank the risk by determining the risk magnitude, which is the combination of likelihood or probability and risk impact. Probability is about the likelihood of a risk if it's happening, and impact is an estimate of the potential losses associated with an identified risk. And proximity means when the risk is likely to happen. We should also be careful about how impact of risk may change during time. Another point to clarify is the risk scale. Scale is the grading criteria for each risk, that is, for the probability and severity score. For example, we can say the impact is very high, or high, medium, low, and very low. Or we can use, for example, scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 5, or we can use traffic lights. There are different types of scales available for determining the risk likelihood and risk impact, and you should decide about it before going through the identification phase. So these scales should be clarified in risk management strategy document that you should develop before going through the identification of risks. In this slide, I want to clarify a few terms. The first one is risk appetite, which is the amount and type of risk that an organization is prepared to pursue, retain, or take. Risk tolerance, the acceptable minimum and maximum risk variation level for a project. And risk appetite depends to the company's longer-term strategy of what it needs to achieve. And risk appetite is a higher level statement, actually, that broadly considers the level of risk that management deems acceptable, while risk tolerance is narrower and set the acceptable level of variation around objectives. Also, we have inherent risks and residual risks. Inherent risk means the risk that exists in a project and we haven't done any action towards them. So we haven't done anything to mitigate risks. So basically, there are risks that already existed in a project and we haven't done anything towards them. And residual risk means that we have done some actions. So we try to mitigate the impact of risk, but we cannot eliminate the risk completely. So there are still a few risks or uncertainty even after we consider some mitigation activities on that risk. There are a number of techniques for estimating risks. Some of them are qualitative and subjective. The other one are quantitative and more objective. To rank risks using qualitative risk assessment method, we usually multiply the likelihood of each risk by its impact, and then we calculate the result and then order the risk based on this score. We can use risk profile, which is a very simple tool to represent risk and how they relate to each other. In this profile, each risk or event identified in the profile is ranked on a scale to determine the likelihood that the event will take place and the impact or potential damage that would occur if that risk happened. There are a number of advantages to this diagram. It is easy to get an overview of all the risk in a project. It is very useful for communicating the project risk with different stakeholders. You can see which risk will need attention. You can draw a risk tolerance line on the diagram to distinguish risks that have both a higher impact and higher probability rate from risks that have a lower level of probability and impact. And finally, all risks above this risk tolerance line might need action to be taken. So it's a good tool that we can use to have a plan to mitigate risk that we are not prepared to accept. It might sound that qualitative approach is not reliable, but that isn't the case. By ranking the severity in broader term, I mean multiplying or combining probability and impact, qualitative risk analysis is perfect for gauging probability and prioritizing risk in a way that it's easy for every person to understand. There are also more objective methods for assessing risks. And as you probably noticed in qualitative methods, we are dependent to expert judgment for estimating the probability and impact of each risk. But quantitative methods are more objectives. There are so many methods available to choose, but here we have, for example, sensitivity analysis. SA is a modeling technique used to help determine which risks have the most potential impact on the project. It helps us to understand how changes in a specific variable impacts the output of the model. So the typical display of results is in the form of a tornado diagram, as you can see in the top figure in the slide. Another method is expected monetary value, or EMV, which is a statistical technique in risk management used to quantify risk and calculate the contingency reserve, risk budget. It calculates the average outcome of all future events that may or may not happen in the project, and quite similar to a qualitative method, you multiply the probability by the impact of the identified risk to get the result. But the figures for probability and impact are not based on expert judgment. It's based on statistical calculation, statistical data available for each risk. So it is more accurate and more objective. We also have decision tree analysis, as you can see in the figure below. Diagramming and calculation technique for evaluating the implication of a chain of multiple options in the presence of uncertainty. The other technique is mathematical simulation. It uses computer models and estimate of risk, usually expressed as a probability distribution of possible cost or duration at a detailed work level, and are typically performed by using Monte Carlo analysis. The Monte Carlo model makes it possible for us to run multiple trials and thus to define all the potential outcome of an event or a risk. Step 3 is about planning the responses. The objective of this stage is to reduce the threats and maximize the opportunities in the project. You probably heard that failing to plan is planning to fail. So we should be always prepared to respond to different uncertainties that may happen to a project. During this step, you assess your highest ranked risks and set out a plan to treat or modify these risks to achieve acceptable risk levels. So you should start thinking about how you can minimize the probability of the negative risks as well as enhancing the opportunities. You should create risk mitigation strategies, preventive plans, and contingency plan in this step. And you should add the risk treatment measures for the highest ranking of or most serious risk to your project risk register. Okay, how do we respond to threats or opportunities in a project? We have 6 response categories for threats and 4 response categories for opportunities. For threats, we have avoid, reduce, fallback, transfer, share, and accept. And for opportunities, we have exploit, enhance, share, and reject. Okay, let's go through the threat responses first. Avoid means we take actions so that the threat no longer has impact or can no longer happen. Reduce or mitigate means we reduce the probability of the risk or reduce the impact if the risk does occur. Fallback means there is a plan of actions that would be done if the risk occurs. For example, we can have a contingency plan. Transfer means transferring the financial risk to another party, for example, insuring the project. Sharing is about distributing or sharing the risk between different people involved in the project or different parties working in the project. And the last option is to accept the risk. So we just accept the risk as nothing can be done to further reduce or avoid. It just may cost too much money to do something about it, or it may not be possible to do anything about it. So you have to accept the risk in some cases. For opportunities, we have exploit, which means if the risk happens, you would take advantage of it and use it. Enhance is where you take action to improve the likelihood of the event occurring, and you enhance the impact if the opportunity should occur. This is not the same as exploit, but doing certain things will give a greater chance for the opportunity to happen. Sharing a risk means working with other people, other organizations involved in the project, who could also benefit from the positive risk, and we should try to exploit it. And finally, reject means you decide not to take any action on this opportunity and you don't need it, you don't like it. Okay, a few examples. First example is for avoid. Let's say we have a risk that human error in design phase leads to clashes between structural elements and mechanical components of the facility. So this is the risk that we should avoid. So to avoid, we can use building information modeling and conduct automatic clash detection, for example, using software such as Navisworks. This way, we just avoid the risk. Another risk is, for example, inaccuracy or incomplete information in the server file that could lead to rework of the design. And our response here is to reduce its probability. Okay? To reduce the probability, we should work closely with the surveyor to verify that the server file is accurate and complete, and we may need to perform additional survey as needed. So we reduce the probability by doing more accurate surveys. Another risk is, let's say, hazardous material encountered during construction that will require an on-site storage area and potential additional cost to dispose. We accept this risk, but you should make sure that storage space will be available on site. An example for positive risks, let's say a new technology is emerging that will help you to save time in this project. You can ask your client to invest in this technology, and basically you share this positive risk with the client, and both of you can take advantages of using this technology. You will build the facility faster, and the client gets more value for its projects. Step 4 is implementing the responses. And the main thing to decide in this step are who is going to monitor these risks and who is going to carry out the planned risk responses. So this is the step where you take your project risk register and use it to monitor, track, and review risks. In reality, not all risks can be eliminated. Some risks are always present. We should make sure that we keep a close watch on all risk factors and monitor their situation to make sure that we are in the safe side. In the risk register, a project team member is assigned to take responsibility for each risk response. This process ensures that each risk requiring a response has an owner who monitors the response, monitor the risk, and do further actions if required. And basically, we have two new roles in risk register. First one is risk owner, second one is risk actionee. The risk owner is responsible for managing and monitoring risk aspects. They can also carry out actions that have been assigned to them. And the risk actionee is someone who is assigned to carry out a particular action, and they support the risk owner. So they are not responsible for monitoring and managing risk, but taking actions in case the risk happens. The risk owner and risk actionee could be the same person in a project. Communication is the fifth step in a risk management procedure, but it is actually done throughout the whole process. This communication step ensures that the information related to the threats and opportunities faced by the project are communicated within and outside the project to all necessary stakeholders. Communicating information about risk is critical to the long-term success of a project. If you regularly engage your stakeholders from the start, their expectations for the delivery and their approach to risk and completion of your project will be more realistic. For effective communication, we can take several techniques, or we can use different strategies. Stakeholders engagement, we should have some rules and regulations and policies. We should define procedures, emergency contract if something goes wrong in the project, or hazard reporting is another issue that we should mention about them in the procedure. We should use different communication channels to share our ideas or communicate risk with other stakeholders. We can use meetings, emails, podcasts, newsletters. We can use different project management platforms, softwares, and other social networking platforms to share the risks among the parties involved in the project. We can provide some training, but in all cases, we should make sure that everybody is aware about the risk in the project, and it helps them to make better decisions and also help them to get more accurate and more real understanding about the project. It is always good practice to put aside a risk budget, an amount of money to control risk if they happened. It is a sum of money that is put aside just to deal with specific responses to threats or opportunities, and it cannot be used for anything else. So you cannot use it for implementing changes in the project or any other things to do with the project. Just you can use it for risks or risk management. Certain responses to risk will require certain actions to be done, and that cost money, and you need this risk budget to cover those costs, extra costs that may incur during the course of the project.